The State versus Richard Alexander Murdaugh, defendant. Indictment for murder, SC Code 16-3-0010, CDR Code 0116. Guilty. Verdict.
Becky Hill, the clerk of court in Alex Murdaugh's double murder trial, under fire by his lawyers for allegedly tampering with the jury.
Jurors must be free from outside influences and must decide the case solely on the evidence presented in the courtroom, subject to the rules of evidence.
Some of the jurors now have lawyers. We talk with one who's been intimately involved in the Murdaugh case about his clients. Thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime. I'm Angenette Levy. Nearly a week ago, Alex Murdaugh's attorneys made some explosive allegations about potential jury tampering by the clerk of courts in Murdaugh's double murder trial. The jury, after hearing 6 weeks of testimony, reached guilty verdicts in about 3 hours. Murdaugh's lawyers claim a couple of jurors told them that Becky Hill discussed Murdaugh's guilt with them and that she had several private conversations with the forewoman. Attorney Joe McCullough is representing two of the jurors, one who was dismissed right before closing arguments. She was dubbed Egg Lady because she asked that she be allowed to return to the jury room to retrieve a dozen eggs.
After watching this trial for 6 weeks, I believe that there would be a hung jury. I believe that the jury would not be able to reach a unanimous verdict. So, yes, as of today, nothing about this case has failed to surprise me. I've been at this almost 50 years. I've been involved in cases where there were allegations of this type. I mean, this is not a unique thing to South Carolina. It's not a unique thing to the Murdaugh family.
Now attorney Eric Bland, who has been outspoken in his belief that Alex Murdaugh killed his wife Maggie and son Paul, is representing two other jurors after offering legal representation on his Twitter account. He also represented victims of Murdaugh's financial crimes and advised the prosecution during the trial. I asked Eric Bland about how he can represent so many people related to this case in so many different ways without creating a conflict of interest. How did this come about? Was it because you put your tweet out that they reached out to you?
A little bit, but I've been victim oriented throughout this whole ordeal for the last 2 years, pro victim and pro prosecution. And I had no problem with Harpootlian's motion that they made, Murdaugh's motion for a new trial. I had no problem with them going and speaking with jurors if jurors wanted to talk to them. That's done all the time. I did take umbrage with how he handled the press conference and what he said, because I don't think it comported with our pretrial publicity rules that we have with the rules of professional conduct with some of the things that he said. It was designed to really sway and move the public. It wasn't in response to anything that the Attorney General had filed or said. And it was meant to be explosive, which is exactly what he accomplished. What I didn't like is the threats that he put in his press conference. One against Judge Newman, saying he was going to be a witness, wouldn't be able to hear the motion if it was remanded by the state appellate court. You know that once you file an appeal, the jurisdiction of the lower court is over, and then it's in the appellate court. Now he's asking the appellate court to stay the appeal and permit the lower court to do an inquiry into these jury issues. So, one, I don't like when jurors make a decision and are individually polled and then say that the verdict was the product of their own free will. It was a just verdict and there was no coercion. And each individual juror at that case was polled. I don't like it 3 months later where somebody can come back and start to change jurors' minds. That's a dangerous thing for our system. But the most important reason why I got involved was because Dick said that the jurors needed to lawyer up. And it was an extraordinary thing for a lawyer to say. Why would jurors need a lawyer? And so that was really the genesis of why I made that offer.
Bland won't say whether or not the two jurors he's representing are men or women, or whether he's representing the forewoman. That is a key question because Murdaugh's motion alleges the forewoman and Becky Hill had several private conversations throughout the course of the trial.
They want to keep their identity confidential until they get in front of the public. But I can tell you this, Angenette, that I believe when they go under oath, they are going to not support the allegations that Dick Harpootlian raised in his motion and in his press conference. I can't reveal the attorney-client privilege of what they told me, but I'm confident that it's going to be a different story.
What story those jurors will tell when and if a hearing is ordered remains a mystery.
It is a very serious allegation. Do not get me wrong. As I said in our first press release, the system has to work for the worst of us so it can work for the rest of us. And Alex is certainly the worst of us that we know of. And it needs to work for him. He needed a fair, impartial jury who deliberated without pressure. No question about it. That is beyond dispute. But what if the jurors say, none of the jurors, I haven't heard any jurors say that they were coerced. I haven't heard any jurors say that what they heard, if they heard anything from Miss Becky, that it swayed them to change their vote or factored in any manner in their vote. Now, Jim Griffin says again, and he may be right, if she injected herself, that could be grounds for a new trial, because it is true that the directives must come from Judge Newman. Becky has the right to coordinate and facilitate, but she can't instruct.
Typically, only bailiffs have contact with jurors. Alex Murdaugh's attorneys are asking the appeals court to stay his appeal in the hope that the case will be sent back to the trial court for a hearing on the jury tampering allegations. But there are questions about how that would unfold. Would Judge Newman still preside over the case? Murdaugh lawyer Dick Harpootlian doesn't think so.
There's no suggestion that the judge did anything untoward. But what that does do, if it comes back, he may end up being a witness.
Newman also granted an interview to the Today Show about the Murdaugh case. Murdaugh's lawyers say Becky Hill sought to profit off the trial by writing a tell-all book.
So immediately in the aftermath of the verdict, we had received information that we needed to look into what happened in the jury room. We started down that road and we met a zone of silence. No jurors would speak to us. And so we were, what I like to call, we were given the Heisman, right? And then when the clerk of court wrote her book, published her book, that zone of silence collapsed. And jurors were upset about that, the ones we talked with, and they were more than willing to come forward and tell us the things that we had sort of heard through a whisper campaign.
I would have preferred that Becky didn't write this book until after this matter was over with. I think she jumped the gun in writing this book before the appeal was heard. I would have preferred that Judge Newman, who is continuing to hear Alex Murdaugh matters, would not have given that interview unless he was going to no longer be the judge on Alex Murdaugh's matter. I would have preferred that. I don't know if it's wrong. I'm not on the ethics commission. I can't make an ethical decision on that. It doesn't look good for Becky. And it's certainly from Judge Newman's standpoint, he's going to have to argue why he can still be impartial.
I've reached out to Becky Hill's lawyers on several occasions asking for a comment on these allegations, and so far, I have not heard back from them. This Thursday, Alex Murdaugh will be back in court for a status hearing on his financial crimes cases in state court. He faces more than 100 charges. This will be the first time he's been back in a state courtroom since his sentencing for the murders of Paul and Maggie. Murdaugh's trial on those cases cannot start until the second half of 2024 due to immunity that Dick Harpootlian has in his role as a South Carolina state senator. Judge Clifton Newman is presiding over those cases as well. Then next week, Alex Murdaugh will appear in federal court to change his plea on financial crimes cases in that court. For Law and Crime, I'm Angenette Levy.